How's it going, everybody? And welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at some true paranormal encounters. As usual, without making the intro too long, we're just going to jump right into it. But before we do that, if you like the video, make sure to subscribe for some more weekly content. It really helps me out a lot. And with that being said, let's jump right into it. I'm an undertaker, and something happened. Something happened, and I've always been skeptical until today. I am an undertaker, and I have been for the past 8 years. I've always been skeptical when it comes to the afterlife, especially the paranormal. But today, something happened that I cannot explain. I was cleaning unclaimed ashes out of the funeral home where I work. We were moving out to the old Victorian building we operate out of into a new funeral home. For the past week, we have been making a slow transition, moving out of our current home into our new one. In our basement, we have unclaimed ashes going as far back as the 1970s. I just had my headphones in, putting the boxes into bags so we could send them to the local crematorium for them to be scattered. I must have put away hundreds of boxes of ashes without even thinking about it. I was just listening to a podcast, getting another task ticked off my to-do list. I was putting one box into the bag and felt my body and brain freeze with the word no, but I didn't hear anything. It's hard to explain what I felt. The best I can explain it is that my own free will had gone, and I was ordered to stop what I was doing. I stopped immediately and put the box of ashes in my hand onto the table. On closer inspection, there were 2 boxes I was going to put into 2 separate bags, one small box and one normal sized one. Let's just say for privacy reasons, one box was labeled Hannah Williams. On top of Hannah Williams' ashes, there was a box labeled Baby Williams. I presume they are the mother and the baby, who I was about to separate into 2 separate bags, which I find quite spooky because I didn't read the labels before. I was doing a mundane task as fast as I could with my existing duties and clearing the premises. I was just trying to get things done as fast as possible and was not paying attention to the names. I just needed to get this done. So yeah, I cannot explain this for the life of me. I cannot come up with the explanation for this. I'm not scared, nor am I excited about what I felt. I just feel confused about the whole situation. This next story is a little bit longer, but I promise it's worth it. So let's get right into it. The White Witch. In the early 80s, I lived in Okinawa, Japan. My dad thought that seeing the world would be an adventure that would help my brother and I become better men. And I have to say, I think he was right. Being in the military showed me cultures many would never get to experience, and I'm thankful for every experience that life gave to me, even the scary ones. While we lived in Japan, my father wanted us to have a fully immersive experience, so he chose to move us into a small Japanese neighborhood off base. We lived in a little house at the top of an enormous hill in a cul-de-sac that overlooked, I kid you not, part of a huge zoo, and on one side a fairly large cemetery. Our particular houses was set far above the monkey habitats, about a mile downhill. Between us and those habitats was nothing but thick Indiana Jones style jungle the neighborhood kids and I would tromp through endlessly, ignoring the local warnings about poisonous snakes and ancient untripped mines from World War II. We were the only Americans family living in the cul-de-sac, completely surrounded by Japanese families, and it was amazing. The kids loved us, and although we couldn't communicate through language very well, we understood each other perfectly. Well, most of the time. Opposite to us was an older couple with a lush green garden surrounding their property. The older woman wanted us to call her Mama-san, and she had us helping her garden whenever she could coax us over with green tea and chocolate/banana cookies. We loved her. She was so welcoming and generous, as was everyone else. Actually, we lived in a wonderful neighborhood. The only drawback to Mama-san's home, however, was that she directly overlooked the cemetery, and that cemetery was unlike any cemetery I had ever seen before. Because Okinawa is an island, burials don't happen very often. Instead, above ground crypts are built, many of them built into the sides of the hills that make up the island. The crypts are large, made up of huge arcs of polished stone set over a large square over that stone, which has a square insert cut into the middle of it for the coffin to be placed inside. Once inside, the square is inset with another piece of polished stone just inside, leaving a kind of a shelf on the outside so offerings could be made to the lost loved ones. Yen, food, flowers, incense are some of the offerings given. Below Mama-san's house was a valley that swooped back up into another hill opposite her home. That valley and both hills were covered with these crypts, and spiderwebbing up and down through the crypts were various stone step pathways that were old and badly maintained. It was quite a sight. One evening, Mama-san asked me to come over with her alone. She had something to show me, but it was only for me as the older brother. Intrigued and a bit proud, I agreed. She took me to the back of her garden, sat me on a thick wooden bench that was covered with senses of fishermen and men with swords, and told me she had a story to tell. Mama-san then disappeared for a few minutes, and soon returned with a tray that held hot green tea and sweet rice cakes. Sitting next to me, she smiled and commented on the colors of the evening sky as the sun began to lower. Mama-san said she had seen me, my brother, and some other kids daring each other to follow a stairway path down into the cemetery. You have to understand, the path from our little home area down to the cemetery consisted of hundreds of steps, many broken and cracking, in and out of bushes and a steep incline, which would be dangerous for anyone, but the real test was seeing how long we could take walking through the crypts at night. Mama-san wanted to explain why that was a bad idea. Many years ago, during the war, Americans were thought to be devils, monsters that would murder innocent citizens for no reason other than to kill. That fear was a product of wartime propaganda used to encourage young men to military service and farmers to fight alongside them, but many didn't. Many ran, and with nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, hundreds of Japanese citizens hurled themselves off a cliffside, rather than face torture at the hands of their perceived enemy. I was terrified after hearing this. I had no idea this had happened. I was mortified and hit with such sadness I started to cry. The sun was setting and the sky went from pink and blue to a deep orange and red. Mama-san reached out and held my hand, telling me not to worry. This was in the past, and the past is something we must always remember, so we never go back. She went on with her story. One young man had followed through with his sacrifice with her 2 children, but she survived the fall. She was in a coma for months. When she did regain consciousness, she was horrified to realize that she was not with her children. They had been buried somewhere in that cemetery below, in an unmarked crypt that held many others. The woman would spend days and nights searching the cemetery, crying in pain, the torment of her lost unbearable, until the day she threw herself into the ocean to hopefully be reunited with her lost family. But they say she never found her children. Her act of taking her own life doomed her to purgatory. She would remain tortured for eternity. The sun had disappeared, the cemetery drowned in inky blackness, the main path dotted with dim broken lights, feebly illuminating the small areas. Mama-san continued. She still wanders the cemetery, she said, looking for her kids. You can hear her crying. And then she pointed down. I didn't want to, but I did. I looked. In the back of the cemetery, in the darkness, there was a white figure. At first a bright white shimmer, moving slowly, kind of shaking. It moved from side to side, like it was moving among the crypts, and you could actually hear the crying. Softly at first, but then low moans and whimpers of pain as it got closer. I was terrified. I wanted to run, but Mama-san held my hand and whispered that she wouldn't come up here. We were too far, but that is why we wouldn't go down there after dark. She said many don't know her story and call her the White Witch, which angers her. It's best to stay away. It's best to pray for her. Mama-san said she comes out to see her often, hoping one day she will find her salvation. Needless to say, I never went down to that cemetery. Not once, and I never sat back there with Mama-san again. That was enough for me. I did, however, visit Suicide Hill. It's called Peace Prayer Park now out of respect. I cried the whole time we were there. I prayed for all the souls and for forgiveness. So many Japanese citizens spoke to us, welcoming us, telling us stories, sharing with us. I didn't feel worthy, and my love for the country and its people was overwhelming. I'll never forget my time there. I'd like to go back to see if she's still there, wandering the graves, looking for her children. I bought my first house and found out it was haunted. I bought my first house in 2003 and was over the moon. Shortly after moving in, 2 of my neighbors began joking with me about the ghost in my house. Well, I thought they were joking, so I just played along, pretending I had seen one, and it was no big deal. Well, as time went on that summer, I met more and more of my neighbors, and they all brought up the same topic. Finally, an elderly woman on the block, who was quite kind and friendly, told me the story after I'd asked her. I knew she wasn't going to screw with my head, which is why I asked her in the first place. Turns out, the previous owner purchased the home because she said it was haunted. Sounds in the night of footsteps and sobbing. The glimpses of a man sitting in a kitchen covered in blood. One of my neighbors helped with the renovations of the house and said that he was putting up drywall when he felt something lift up his dreadlocks. Though I've had paranormal experiences before, it had been years, and by then I chalked it up to night terrors. One day, I went to a small neighborhood video store to rent a movie. I had to fill out a form with my demographic data and then my credit card info. The owner of the store looked at the form and said, "Oh my god, you live in that house." I asked her what she meant, and she explained that her former employee had taken his own life in my house. She came to the house as soon as she heard, but the house had been taped off by police as a potential crime scene. She told me that he had just moved into the house with his partner and called his mom because he wanted to invite her over to meet his partner and come out to her. This was in the early 90s when being gay was a big deal. His mother already knew he was gay because he bought a house with a man and disowned him right over the phone. The same week, he received a letter from an HIV testing center stating he had tested positive for HIV. This is when HIV was a death sentence. He then sat at the kitchen table, ate a bowl of cereal, and shot himself in the head with a revolver. Since then, she has had multiple paranormal experiences in the house, with videos flying off the shelves and even levitating off shelves. The most I have experienced is sounds at night, sounds of Cheerios being poured into a bowl, I don't eat cereal, and sounds of sobbing in the kitchen. I often awaken to both. I remember my grandmother saying, "When the dead come to you, they want something. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them." So I did. I sat down at the kitchen table one night and lit a candle and told him that each night I would recite a novena prayer for him before a lit candle. On the 9th night of the first novena to Saint Anthony, patron saint of lost souls, I heard uncontrollable sobbing. I felt a strong presence of grief and despair, and sounds of hyperventilating breathing, as though someone could not catch their breath. I sat in the presence of this, knowing it was not malignant, but rather a connection of intimacy and passion, of which he was in need. For 45 days I said a novena prayer before a lit candle for his soul, and had a mass said in his name. A few times I had awakened to his presence standing over my bed, but knew it was not malignant present. This still happens from time to time, but less and less frequently. My husband died in 2020. After he died, I found a series of very unpleasant things about him. It was devastating and took me more than 3 years to come to grips with it. He died in August of 2020, and I sold our condo in June of 2021. He had renovated the entire condo, kitchen, both bathrooms, flooring, trim, doors, everything. It took nearly 3 years. I have 2 small dogs, and when the realtor told me someone was coming to see the property, I took the dogs, locked the door, and went outside. The realtor told me to be out for about 30 minutes. The door was locked. I entered, and when I did, it looked as if people had been there. Doors were moved, the laundry doors were wide open. I had them closed, they were barn doors. I then got a text from the realtor asking me why I didn't put the key in the lockbox on the main floor outside. The people couldn't get in with their realtor. I'll be honest, I was in a very bad place after he died, particularly after what I found, and thinking in detail was not something I was doing. I went to the main washroom and saw that the bath mat was sitting over the tub, not in the way I left it. I touched it and felt water, almost like someone got out of a shower and had been standing on it. It was a fairly big apartment, 2 bedrooms and an office. When the dogs and I were in bed at night, I could hear noises in the kitchen. After he died at night, I was too afraid to get out of bed. It was a concrete building and we couldn't hear anything people were doing in apartments near us, so hearing something was very unusual. I moved in June of 2021 to a new condo. The first night there I was alone. The dogs were being taken care of. I was laying in bed, not asleep, laying on my side at the edge. I felt someone brush past me. My hair actually moved. It scared the hell out of me. I lay there for a few minutes, afraid to move. Finally, I move again, recently far from where I had been living. The last Christmas Eve I was in bed. My bedroom door was open, and I clearly heard 3 knocks on that door. It happened twice. This also really scared me. I had never been one to think of the spirit world until recently. Last Christmas I made statements out loud and told him to leave me alone. So far all has been good. The last 4 years have been a real ride. And that's the end of that story. And I just wanted to add that this is such a sad story. Like, I couldn't imagine having to raise kids without the father being there. It must be so difficult for the OP to manage. I hope she's doing a lot better now. But yeah, anyways, let's move on to the next story. My nurse was a ghost. In 2020, at the beginning of COVID, I had just given birth. At this time, I could only have one other person in the room with me, my entire stay at the hospital. Of course, my kid's father was there, but like the 3rd day he left to clean up our house and get everything prepared for me and the baby. I had gotten sick and had a C-section, so I had to stay about an extra 4 to 5 days. Well, while he was away, a nurse named Kelly said she would be helping me throughout the day and spending time with me, so I don't feel lonely while dad is gone. I couldn't really hold my baby due to me being sick and in pain from the C-section, so my nurses would come in every time it was time to feed. I noticed when they came in, they wouldn't acknowledge Kelly, and she would go to the farthest part of the room and she would tell me, "I'm just gonna get out of the way now." Now, she did tell me that she didn't specialize in what they did, she was just for comfort, so I didn't question anything. The entire day, she was so helpful and encouraging to me. I really believe I would have broken down if she wasn't in there with me. She was such a sweetheart. Well, after 5 or 6 hours, she told me she had to leave and that she would come visit me before her shift was over to see how I was doing. She hugged me, blew me a kiss and my baby, and walked out of the room. Later that night, Dad came back and was very upset. He told me some stuff happened with his mom and that he was sorry he took so long. I was upset, but I told him a nurse named Kelly kept me company. As I'm telling him about her, my nurse is changing my sheets and she's like, "Who is Kelly?" I explained and she said nobody named Kelly was in my room or working that day. So I instantly thought about those women who would pretend to be nurses and kidnap children. But my nurse told me that I may be hallucinating and she told my doctor. I talked to my doctor and he said the same thing. Well, a couple of hours later, a nurse that I didn't recognize came in my room and said, "I know this might sound crazy, but everyone on the floor is talking about how you seen Kelly." I said, "Yeah, she was here with me for like 7 hours today. She helped out a lot." We were smiling, laughing while I was telling her about Kelly and how sweet and funny she was. She then pulled up her phone and showed me pictures of her and Kelly that looked like to be maybe early 2000s. I was smiling, knowing that I wasn't hallucinating. Then she sat down and told me Kelly died over 10 years ago from domestic violence with her boyfriend. I wasn't too shocked because my entire life I've been dealing with paranormal activity, but I got chills because I never had an encounter this deep. Well, the lady gave me a hug and started crying, saying, "Now I know that she's okay." Since that day, I've been working. Why did Kelly come in my room and help me? I kinda wish I could see her again. And just a side note, I just gotta say, I like this story a lot. It's very emotional and very personal, and honestly, it's probably the most believable story here. I just really like this story a lot. Anyways, moving on. My grandma's house is haunted, but we're not allowed to tell her. My grandma's house was always, for as long as I can remember, been a scary place. My dad and aunt and uncle all grew up in the house and had paranormal experiences occur throughout their lives. One example was when my dad and uncle were teenagers. My uncle was walking down the steps and was swinging a towel, as he had just washed his hair. Out of nowhere, my dad, who was standing in the living room at the bottom of the stairs, saw the towel straighten out in front of my uncle as if someone pulled it, and my uncle fell forcefully down the stairs. Now, my grandma hates all things paranormal, especially Ouija boards, and she would often visit gypsies, so it's a big no-no in our family to discuss the paranormal events that occur in her house. 20 years or so ago, my cousins and brothers were playing in the upstairs bedrooms of my grandparents' house. The toys were set up in the room across from the hall from them, and they were all in the same bedroom, playing a board game. Out of nowhere, a Hot Wheels car, no batteries, no wind up, just an average Hot Wheels car, slowly exited the room that the toys were in, went across the hall and into the room where they were all sitting. Needless to say, they were all terrified. Around 8 years ago, my brother moved in to the basement of their house. One night, when he was home alone and he woke up out of a deep sleep, having felt like he was shaken by someone, he stood up and instantly smelled gas. He went upstairs and outside of the house. Later, he found out there was a carbon monoxide leak, and if he had not woken up, there's a big chance he could have died in his sleep. Months after that, when my grandparents were away for the weekend, the family decided to try the Ghost Radar app in their house. We all sat down the phone, and my uncle asked the normal questions. "Is anyone here? Blah blah." Then he asked, "Who used to live in the basement?" At this point, my brother had moved out. The Ghost Radar replied with my brother's full first name, which no one ever calls him. We were shocked, so my uncle asked, "How did you save my brother?" It replied with, "Wake." What the fuck? He then asked, "What did you save him from?" And it said gas. Bro, needless to say, we were shocked. The last thing that I'm going to talk about that happens in the house is my grandparents' friend's obituary, who passed away probably 15 years ago, will show up in their kitchen every month or so. They usually say hello to their friend and put the obituary back in the basement where it's supposed to stay. A little while later, it will show up back in the kitchen. Sorry that was long, but there's more stories. And by the way, if you guys aren't aware, a carbon monoxide leak is kind of common actually, especially in these Reddit stories. Basically, it can make you hallucinate, it can make you forget your memory, and you won't even realize, and one day it'll just have so much in the air that it could just kill you in your sleep, which is terrifying. That's why most houses now have carbon monoxide detectors, but older houses didn't have this as much. So yeah, let's get on to the next story. A terrifying encounter while in Iraq. I was a sergeant in the US Army and ETSing it, getting out from the military when President Bush ordered more troops into Iraq in 2003. I had just returned home to Austin, Texas, when I was summoned into my local National Guard unit at Camp Mabry and told that I was being recalled to the Army, but the unit was already tasked out to deploy to Iraq. I was not part of the unit yet, so the commander offered me to give me a waiver to deploy with the government contractor, Halliburton in Houston. I knew that I would make more money as a contractor, so I took the offer. Not long after arriving in Kuwait at Camp Doha, I began working in the operations team overseeing logistic affairs. We would oversee the daily convoy of supply between Kuwait and Baghdad, a route riddled with IED incidents, small arms skirmishes, and almost constant breakdowns of army and civilian vehicles. Because I was a saw gunner in the 1st Infantry Division while in active duty and was technically still in the Guard, I was often in the convoys manning a mounted weapon that accompanied the mostly civilian convoys. During these runs, we had a few strange encounters in an area south of Baghdad known as the Camp Babylon. Occupied by the French troops, but then designated an archaeological site for obvious reasons, Camp Babylon was set up in the area that was said to originally be inhabited by the famous Tower of Babel. Indeed, these were the ruins that did look like a massive structure once stood at that spot. I had 2 strange incidents happen to me while passing through there. The first incident seems a bit benign, but sets the mood for the second. We were passing through Camp Babylon in the afternoon one day when our convoy took small arm fire. The SOP at the time, standard operation procedure, was to stop the convoy and return fire. This was because in the past, such incidents ended up being a lone gunman attempting to scare the convoy into running into IEDs on the road. Because of this, the SOP changed to stop the convoy, dismount, and return fire. While engineers looked for explosive devices on the road, we scanned the horizon for the enemy. Nothing. The most likely fled immediately. However, the ruins around Camp Babylon were alive with shadow figures. They seemed to move about the area. Several times we would spot the figures, but they would immediately disappear. A contractor lying beside me with his weapon commented, "How odd that we are in the shadow of Babel and fighting the supernatural." I didn't respond, but knew he was a 32nd degree Mason who was really into the arcane aspects of Babylon, etc. I didn't feel at the time that much was supernatural, but certainly did see the shadowy and bizarrely small figures dart about the structures. Once the road was deemed clear, we continued to Baghdad. The second incident occurred about a month later. At this point, the weather in southern Iraq and Kuwait had turned quite cold at night. We had just completed the supply run to Baghdad and were returning back to Camp Doha in Kuwait when a vehicle in our convoy broke down. Once again, we found ourselves right at Camp Babylon. While the army mechanics took a look at the vehicle, the rest of us took up fighting positions around the area. Strange things began to occur. It started with a strange light bobbing in the desert. Thinking it was a person with the flashlight, we used NVG's, night vision goggles, to watch. It was simply a glowing ball of light moving towards a set of ruins. After initial contact with the light, a few of us had moved forward away from the convoy to see what the source was. After seeing it was self-contained and not a person, we were a bit alarmed. Then we heard a sound that I will never forget. A long wailing began from one of the ruined structures/foundations, not far away. It sounded like a woman in agony mixed with loneliness. On and on the sounds went while we huddled in the cold dark, wondering what the hell we were listening to. With our NVGs equipped, we used our flashlights to spotlight the ruins. If you've ever done this, you'll know that a normal flashlight with NVGs looked like a massive beam of light. We scoured the area, but no source of the wails or the ball of light were seen, but this time we were told via radio that the vehicle was repaired and ready to roll, so we decided to return to the convoy. I was slinging my saw over my shoulder when I noticed my contractor partner was staring at the ruins in horror. He was frozen. I shook him and he snapped out of his stupor, quickly leaving the area with the rest of us. Once we were back at camp and it was pleasantly daylight the following morning, several of us were chatting about the encounter at Camp Babylon before our daily operations briefing. It was then that I remembered the terrified expression on the face of the contractor, so I asked him about it. He was still obviously traumatized by the event, but managed to explain that as we were leaving our position on the sandy hill, he saw a tall, black figure standing beside the ruin. It was watching us as we were looking for him, her/it. He said that he felt an instant wave of despair hit him and thought that he was going to die. He didn't remember leaving the area. His next memory was in the Humvee headed back to Kuwait. I now write non-fiction books about haunted places for Llewellyn Publishing and have visited hundreds of reputedly haunted spots, but I'll never forget the wailing figure at the ruins of Babel. It's also worth noting that when I related this story to some of our Pakistani employees at Camp Doha and Camp Arifihan, they also were quite horrified. One of them, a translator was called Artie, said that he had encountered a jinn or a damned spirit, and that we were lucky to be able to tell the tale. I agree. And that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, if you liked the video, make sure you subscribe for some more weekly content. I try to post every week, and let me know what was your favorite story out of this video. Mine was probably the White Witch, or the one with the ghost nurse helping the lady with the C-section. I think those stories were just very well written and very emotional. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and have a good rest of your day.